Greetings and peace, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Tonight, I have the honor, privilege, and pleasure of being joined by my Sheikh, Murshid, brother, and friend, Sheikh Wahid Azal of the Nur Fatimiyya Sufi Order, who returns for part 21 in this series of dialogues and conversations that we have been having. And for those that have missed previous episodes, please go on the playlist and you will see the Nur FSO playlist, and I have everything compiled. So without further ado, Bismillah, Nur alaikum, and welcome to our dear brother, Sheikh, and friend. Today we will discuss the Israel-Palestine issue.
Well, alaikum nur to everybody. It's good to be back on again. It's been a very busy time. A lot of it has been kind of consumed with the production of the Nur Tarot and my continuing to work on the book itself. A lot of interest. There was one publisher that came forward wanting to publish the cards. They put a contract in front of me, but the contract was terrible. And so I basically said no and decided to go for at least the time being solo and just do a production run on on a one-by-one basis. Whoever contributes about $200 I will make them the cards, the divination table, and send them out to their location until I think maybe probably a couple of dozen decks are produced, and then maybe that way I will get a decent contract put in front of me by a good publisher, and then that element will be taken out of my hands. So and then I can basically continue with the book. Yes, so the world is on another precipice, but this is a very significant moment in world history at the moment. I was kind of anticipating something, and I was anticipating something coming from the Middle East. I wasn't exactly sure where it was going to come from. I thought that about a week and a half ago, I thought it was going to be this other incident that occurred in the Tehran metro, where another woman was basically maimed and put in the hospital and killed by the guidance patrol of the IRI. But it came surprisingly via this event that happened on October 7th in Israel, or Palestine, occupied Palestine. And it is very interesting. Yes, it is a tragedy all around, but there are so many different elements to this that looking at the various threads of what is going on becomes quite an exercise in and of itself. I will go on the record to begin with and say that we need to, first of all, separate the actual action that occurred from the greater constellation of the colonization of Palestine for the last 75 years. Yes, Hamas is a terrorist organization, but we're going to get into that in a minute, because Hamas is basically a Frankenstein monster, a creation of Israel itself. So, when people in the West and governments, and especially the media, jump on their predictable outrage train, they need to go back to the 1980s and look at the response of the Israeli Shin Bet, that's the military intelligence and Mossad, its general intelligence service, in response to the first intifada that occurred in the occupied territories at the time. At the time, the opposition was the PLO of Yasser Arafat and the various organizations and party affiliated to it. And when the first intifada, first uprising in the occupied territories of the West Bank and Gaza occurred, Israeli military intelligence and the Mossad determined that the best way to counter the influence of the secular leftist and nationalist Palestinian Liberation Organization was to basically take out the most radicalized and militant elements of the Palestinian and Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood in occupied Palestine, and basically cement them into an organization that became Hamas as a way to counter the secular leftist and secular nationalist influence of the PLO in the occupied territories. And so once the Oslo Accords between Arafat and the government of Yitzhak Rabin was concluded between 1992 and 1993, and the Palestinians were the PLO was eventually invited back to come to these occupied territories in the hopes that eventually this would result in a Palestinian state based on the original UN partition plan of 1947. Quickly, Hamas became the main opposition to the PLO and the Palestinian Authority, as it subsequently became. But nevertheless, the fact is that this fire was stoked by Israel itself, this Frankenstein monster, was created by Israel itself. And the existence of Hamas in and of itself, despite its election victory in 2005, has been instrumental in dividing the Palestinian cause and Palestinians since that period, that Arafat and the Palestinian leadership came back to Palestine. So this is one of the most important and significant elements of this greater Palestinian struggle, and especially the events that happened last Saturday, that needs to be taken in mind. So then the question becomes, why now? What prompted this organization, which has been under the thumb of Israel from its inception in many ways? Granted, it has an alliance with Iran and Syria and Hezbollah, and we'll get into some of the elements of that in a minute as well. But what happened that a area of the world that is the most highly surveillanced, right, and the most highly cordoned off area in the planet, bar none, can manage to be the place, the locus for the plotting of one of the most significant events in the history of that region since the Yom Kippur War of 1973, which was also a surprise attack. And this doesn't make any sense. Now, on the one hand, Israel itself, over the last year, has been in a state of near civil war between the supporters of the government of Benjamin Netanyahu and Benjamin Netanyahu himself, and the general Israeli public, who are up in arms against the attempts of Netanyahu and his government to basically curtail the power of the independent judiciary in Israel. So the claim is that because of this, social strife, that the intelligence apparatus of Israel basically failed and didn't see this coming. I don't believe that. In an area like the Middle East, and especially Palestine, Israel never sleeps. Even if the government and the people and the civil society are in the middle of an issue, the intelligence and military apparatus of that colonial settler state never sleeps. So my reading of this situation is that the military and intelligence apparatus of Israel knew very well something was up. In fact, the Egyptians are on record 3 days before it happened, warning the Israelis that something was going down. And the Israelis failed to act. So what happened, in my reading, the only conclusion that one can reach is that the Israelis allowed this to happen. The right-wing government of Benjamin Netanyahu allowed this to happen, number one, as a means to mute this ongoing criminal investigation against him personally, and number two, to stop the tide of the social revolt in Israel itself against this government and its attempts to basically turn the independent judiciary into nothing. So this is where this is all coming from. But from the other side of the equation, and as I have been arguing for decades now, Iran, the leadership, the elite of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Israelis have their hands in each other's pockets. And the Israelis proved this very decisively earlier this year and late last year in the face of the massive uprising of the Iranian people against the system over there, when the Israelis all of a sudden decided to support the son of the Shah, Reza Pahlavi, and these very right-wing pro-MAGA Iranian monarchists, that then became the reason why this movement basically halted. Because we were really on the verge of overthrowing the IRI late last year and early this year. But the minute that you had these monarchists and these neocon Iranian supporters of Reza Pahlavi, who were also simultaneously big supporters of Israel and Zionism, the minute they inserted themselves into this greater movement, the movement came to a halt. The system in Iran used that as a way to discredit the movement as a whole, and basically send everybody back into their homes. This is the problem. So people need to read these signs and understand what is going on. About 1 week exactly from this other incident that occurred in the Tehran metro, all of a sudden this event happens in Palestine. So I am reading this event as an underhanded attempt and a sort of false flag with even the complicity of the leadership of the Islamic Republic of Iran itself, regardless of what rhetoric that they're putting out there about, supporting the Palestinian people. Because let's get something straight. If the Palestinian issue is ever resolved for the benefit of all the people living there, that is Arab, Muslim, Jew, Christian alike, then the biggest loser in such a gambit and such an event is none other than the mullahs of Iran and their proxies such as Hezbollah and including Hamas itself. So they are accelerationists. The mullahs, at least the people around Ayatollah Khamenei, are accelerationists. But We have a government in power in Israel today who are likewise messianic accelerationists that want to bring about, the coming of their Messiah and the end of the world and all the rest of it. So we are dealing with two accelerationists that have clearly, in my reading of the situation, manipulated events to allow it to reach this point. But what happened? What happened is that on the morning of October 7th, Saturday, you had Hamas forces attacking past the Gaza barriers by land, sea, and air. They were using paragliders, and they basically landed in several different civilian areas, and particularly a rave concert that was happening less than 3 kilometers from the Gaza-Israel border, which was basically mainly off-duty IDF soldiers, rank-and-file soldiers. There were no civilians. These were all mainly soldiers. Probably the only civilians there at that concert would have been the organizers and technical people and that. But the majority of the people there were off-duty and at this rave concert. So that element of the narrative that the mainstream media is putting out there needs to be looked at a little bit more carefully. Because under the rules of war, military personnel, or no matter what their status, are always legitimate targets. What are not legitimate targets, whether from the rules of engagement in war or even from our point of view, are civilians, men, women, children, etc. Now, I am not saying that the indiscriminate targeting of civilians didn't happen. What I am saying is that these narratives are now being exaggerated. One example of this is the claim that in one of the kibbutzim, one of these collective farms close to the Gaza border, that you had the beheading of 40 children. Now, an actual Israeli journalist working for the New York Times, right, was invited into this kibbutz and asked very clearly the IDF officials there investigating to show them evidence of these beheaded children. And they are still trying to produce the actual evidence of 40 beheaded children. Yes, children were killed indiscriminately, but not these beheadings. So there was no ISIS kind of event going on where Hamas were basically relishing the beheading of Israeli children. This didn't happen. Yes, the children were killed. This is unfortunate, and they have violated the rules of engagement, both on the level of international law and as well as from the point of view of Islamic law. When you indiscriminately target civilians, we have very clear instructions that this is a war crime, both from a secular point of view as well as a religious one. And if this has happened, which it looks like it did, then these people have basically sinned. And so as far as I'm concerned, is they have departed the deen altogether. Because we have instructions in the Sharia, we have instructions within the Hadith literature from the Prophet, peace be upon him himself, that women, children, the infirm, the elderly are never to be attacked in war, in any kind of jihad. But these people have done that, their predecessors have done that, the Iranians have done that, the ISIS has done that. So that tells you how Islamic these organizations and groups are. Now, what we enter is, which is very interesting, but also very predictable, is that the media and governments and the general civil society of the West is now up in arms, trying to call this Israel's 9/11 moment. And you have the usual spiel and narratives of violence and terrorism, etc. Regardless of the fact that this issue was prompted by none other than Israel itself. Only a week and a half ago at the General Assembly of the United Nations in New York, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu himself got up on the podium and claimed that he was going to reshape the map of the Middle East. What's happened? Here we go. The reshaping of the map of the Middle East is happening right now in live. And what other than the reshaping of the map of the Middle East would benefit the Israelis other than the fact that they would get a carte blanche or some kind of fait accompli and coup de grace to go after the Palestinians and now conclude their ethnic cleansing of Palestine, and especially in Gaza, and eventually in the West Bank, which they are dotting with these illegal settlements by these Jewish settlers. So punditry and people who are examining this conflict right now need to look at so many different elements of this story before either condemning or lauding or otherwise. I am with the people of Palestine. I am not with an organization. I do not like Hamas, and I've told you why. Because this Hamas was from its inception and creation of the Israelis. So any violence that they are unleashing right now, whether on the Israelis or as a blowback by the by the Israelis against the Palestinians. These are all things that have benefited the Israeli security and military establishment and apparatus from its inception. So Hamas absolutely must be condemned, but the general dynamic of what is going on here is pretty significant. And what is going to come out of all of this remains to be seen. But my personal opinion is that there are a greater constellation of forces beyond the human that are directing events that eventually will lead to the decolonization of Palestine and the end of this Israeli colonial settler state that has been a festering cancer in the region since 1948, and that has been instrumental in propelling every single conflict that has existed in that region, including the rise of militant Islamic fundamentalism, whether in Iran, whether in its Wahhabi form or otherwise. Without Israel, if this excuse does not exist in the region, if Palestine had been a multi-ethnic democratic state from its inception, then none of these problems would have existed. So imperialism has used this, used the creation of these fake groups and these militant and violent organizations as a way to, number one, maintain its settler colonialism in the Levant, and number two, to keep all the governments and forces in that region weak and divided so that they cannot resolve the issue. And this incident right now, the so-called 9/11 of Israel, which is no different than the 9/11 of New York City itself, is at least in the back of the minds of the people who perpetrated precisely that very thing. But this time, in my opinion, they have made a gross miscalculation. And the beauty of this miscalculation even goes beyond these governments themselves and goes even falls at the feet of the very plutocrats in control of the social media space, such as Elon Musk. He bought Twitter, turned it into X, took all the stopgaps away so that you can't censor anyone anymore. Now, you go to Twitter and you look at all the tweets that are going on. Almost like 65 to 70% of the people on Twitter are pro-Palestinian, right? And are putting actual narratives of the events that are going on. Facebook is a little bit more subdued for obvious reasons, but they're still not taking down posts in support of Palestine. So this has been the law of unintended consequences that has happened even to the plutocrats of this time, such as Musk, etc. And so they are losing control of the narrative, and that means that in the long term, that the people who want to liberate Palestine and decolonize that region and push back against these forces of neocolonialism and imperialism in the region are going to win. It's going to take a little bit of work. It's going to probably be about a decade, maybe less. But in the end, we will win. And in my opinion, this is written in the stars. So if this is a false flag, Israel just made its greatest miscalculation. Yes, they're going to go into Gaza. There will be a land offensive. They will kill maybe even a third or more of the population there. And this will be a war crime. But the fact is they have, in the long term, miscalculated, because the tide of worldwide public opinion is very decisively this time turning against Israel itself. And no matter how much the mainstream media is trying to spin this narrative in favor of the Israelis, this is not working anymore. And you see it all over cyberspace. People that you did not expect to come in support of the Palestinians are starting to come. The usual spiel of people from before is still there, but it has its counter this time, right? And these counters are not being silenced. And this is a great, great, great thing. I'll hand it over to you, Salman.
Yes, Sheikh, this is absolutely correct. And I agree with you completely. I believe, in my opinion, within the next maybe 5 to 10 years, by 2030 maximum, we are going to see this decolonization and this land return to its original Semitic people. Because before the Rothschild created what we know as Israel today, of course, the Brits are always involved. The Arabs, Christians, Muslims, Jews, etc., were all peacefully living in that land. But what we have today is Zionism, and also a white settler regime, where it doesn't matter if you're a Jew in that land. If you're not like them, then they do not give you any consideration at all. Yeah. And what I'm seeing right now is like all of the celebrities, all of the politicians, all of the systems that we know. It's all, if God forbid they say anything for Palestine, because it shows you that these Zionists have basically seeped their controls all over the world. It's like even in 9/11, you had the dancing Israelis
Yeah.
who are part of the urban moving company. So their deception, and they arrested these guys at the George Washington Bridge, and nobody knows about it. And one of Mossad's motto is that by deception we shall do war.
Yeah.
So the thing is that most people in the West, they do not know. They cannot sympathize with the Palestinians because the victims are not white. Of
Yeah.
course, the Ukraine situation, I mean, we are with the Ukrainian people and what they had to deal with Vladimir Putin and the Russians. But here you see the bias of the Western world where the same exact thing is happening to the Palestinians, but just because the victims are not white, they do not care. And in the American school system, every year they tell us about the Holocaust and teach us about this, this, and this to sympathize with the said group of people. But the same exact thing is happening right now, a war crime where they
Yeah.
turned off they turned off the water, gas, electric, heat, food. I mean, even in a federal prison, the most worst criminals in America are not denied those human rights.
That's right.
Why is the world silent? And this is something that has hurt me deeply. And unfortunately, with the IRI and a lot of these guys in Israel, they are all buddy buddy behind the scenes. And it's just like how in Pakistan and India they pretend to hate each other, but when you go to London, all of their families are best
Yeah.
friends with each other. And you see that I've seen this reality with my own eyes.
Yeah.
So most people have to wake up, and the Sheikh is correct. Within the next 5 to 10 years, their decolonization is going to happen. And I look forward to that day within my lifetime because the innocent men, women, and children do not deserve what is happening.
No.
And the Zionist control over the American politicians, where they all have to bend over to Israel and put the little hat on and go touch the Wailing Wall. It's this has something's got to give because when human beings are lives are at stake and everyone is silent, it makes sense why the world is suffering now as it is.
Absolutely, but the thing is that the American public also, in some ways, has its own self to blame for swallowing the Kool-Aid because of its the anti-intellectualism that conservative leaders in America have spoon-fed the general American population with for decades. But a lot of people also, interestingly enough, are waking up. Like, for example, an anomaly in all of this morning was the comments of Trump, who, in my opinion, just shot himself in the foot in his re-election prospects by basically having a go at Netanyahu over what happened. And this was stupid on his part because that means that he's just lost the Jewish vote, which means that forget about re-election. So this is the situation. But what this will do, in my opinion, if the Zionist lobby in the United States does penalize Trump for this, is that Trump's base will now start to veer into anti-Zionist decolonial discourses. This will be their natural way. And then once that happens, when you have a conservative base in America starting to question these Zionist narratives that have, basically had a stranglehold over the United States, that's when it will get interesting. Unfortunately, when conservatives usually veer into the anti-Zionist narrative, they usually adopt more fascist and neo-Nazi ones. But then that will be the job of the genuine decolonial left to educate these people and then pull them away from that. We are in an interesting period, and I do not see how, even if Israel goes all out and kills every man, woman, and child in Gaza, that they can get out of this because perception counts. Now, Israel is claiming that this was a surprise attack. If it really was a surprise attack, then this shows that Israel is weak, that its military and intelligence apparatus is not up to the job. And then when Biden sends an American naval fleet, of war frigates, etc., to the aid of the Israelis in all of this, that tells you that without the United States, Israel is a paper tiger. So what does this do long term? It emboldens the people of the region. It forces the hands of the regimes in the region, from the Gulf Arab monarchies to some of these countries in North Africa, the Moroccans. It emboldens the population of the ground, and then it makes these countries pull away from their from their attempt to make peace with Israel. So that's now all shelved. If this is the case, and this is the result, and if Israel perpetrated this as a false flag, then it has also shot itself in the foot, because now it is pushing the Arab streets into the arms of a resistance. Now, I think that long term, Hamas as an organization is going to basically show itself for what it is. And then out of this, a new Palestinian resistance will also emerge, because the Palestinian Authority, unfortunately, since the death of Yasser Arafat, has become nothing more than a rubber stamp of the Israelis themselves. They've bought and infiltrated many of the people in the West Bank, PA, etc. But this was by design. There's an article I posted actually by Al Jazeera this morning, where Netanyahu went on public record himself saying that the policy of any Israeli government would be to cultivate Hamas, would be to throw more money into areas that Hamas can benefit, because they want a divided Palestinian leadership. They don't want any rapprochement between the various Palestinian groups, and they don't want a singular opposition. They don't want to deal with another PLO. So Hamas has been a gift that has kept on giving, even now, with this event, because without it, and if this event had not happened last weekend, arguably within the next couple of months, Netanyahu would have probably been booted out of office. This far-right government would have faced a crisis. There would have been significant pushback in the attempts by the government to curtail the power of the judiciary, and that would have been it, for the power and influence of these people who are mainly settlers, who have their own set of interests against the city dwellers in Israel, which is a real interesting dynamic and conversation all in itself. So that would have been the result. Now what you've had with this event, you've had basically, at least, in word, the Israeli public uniting behind the government, and again, behind its attempts to basically go after Gaza and Hamas. But then here's the thing. Let us say that Israel succeeds in eliminating Hamas, right? What next? It has eliminated its own Frankenstein monster. You still have a Palestinian population in the West Bank, and you still have a putative organization that could potentially then pull away from Israeli infiltration and influence, namely the Palestinian Authority. And once again, they're back at square one with an organization, a revamped version of the Palestinian Liberation Movement, a revamped version of the PLO, which is secular nationalist leftist, right? The original template of a Palestinian resistance, not this Islamist Muslim Brotherhood nonsense of Hamas and its various backers. So any which way that Israel turns right now, it is not in a good situation in the long term, however much bullets that it throws and bombs it throws at the people of Palestine. This is over. The tide of public opinion is changing. The changing of hands of social media to people like Elon Musk, even though the guy is a fascist in his own right, has been a gift to the opposition to Israeli settler colonialism, and this is not going to change, into the foreseeable future. Which means that now is the time for people of goodwill and conscience to organize and help get the word out about the Palestinian cause, change hearts and minds, get people to stop listening to the mainstream narrative, which fortunately enough, the last couple of years has actually done that. People on the right and the left no longer take anything that is coming from mainstream newspapers or television media, etc., on face value. People are questioning. So now is a good time to get the word out, but also it is a time for people of goodwill and conscience to basically root out the agent provocateurs, identify these groups that are actually, who maybe put on one face but are actually doing something else for the benefit of the enemy, to root these kinds of organizations and influences out of themselves. For example, here in Australia, there is a groundswell of support from a lot of different sectors of society for the Palestinian cause. But last Monday, when you had the march to the Sydney Opera House, when the government of New South Wales put illuminated the Sydney Opera House with the blue and white colors of Israel, you had people who were marching from the Palestinian side that apparently were chanting slogans that is actually counterproductive. Although people who were there that I know say that these slogans didn't happen, they were there right in the thick of it, and people were chanting something else, and that these are manipulated that this isn't how it happened. People were not saying things like gas the Jews and fuck the Jews. Were not saying that at these rallies. But the next morning, the world media and the Australian media was claiming that they were, which says that there are interests in Australia itself that do not want to allow a groundswell of support for Palestine. And in fact, they have broadcasted, as of the headlines today, in the Australia, this is one of Murdoch's rags. And you look at the headline, it says, ASIO is the CIA of Australia. ASIO, war of words warning. And when you read the article, basically the chief intelligence organization of this country is basically warning the public, and especially the pro-Palestinian people in Australia. And since there's a raft of legislation that exists in this country that allows the federal government and security apparatus to go out of it after anybody on any pretext, this was, in my opinion, quite a thing for this Murdoch rag to publish this headline with ASIO's warning. Otherwise, this would have gone under the radar, which tells you that the government of this country and its establishment are deeply worried, and especially the Jewish lobby that controls the politicians of this country like puppets, that they're deeply worried that this status quo and this situation that has been lingering in this country for at least the last 50 years is at risk of changing, and they don't want that. So this is also my gauge that we are in a different situation now, that this action, both in its tragedy and in its triumph, was a game changer. My heart goes out to the families of those Israeli Jews who were civilians and lost their loved ones. Nobody should have to go through something like that, whatever side they're on. But the fact is that Israel is a settler colonial state, and when you subjugate a population at the level that they have been subjugated for the last 75 years, and since the 1967 war, especially in the West Bank and Gaza, when you do the kind of things to a population that Israel has done, this is the response that you get. In South Africa during the apartheid period, the ANC and Nelson Mandela were also classified as a terrorist organization. And apartheid South Africa also forced the ANC and its various affiliates to conduct these sorts of acts of resistance. When a state apparatus pushes against the population, the subjugated population who are native to that land in the manner that they have, what are they supposed to do? Die? No, they will resist. And these are the ways that resistance crop up. If you don't want violence, if you don't want terrorism, then you don't continue your settler colonial state. You dismantle the Jewish state. You create a multi-ethnic, secular democratic Palestine where Jew, Christian, Druze, etc. can all live as equal citizens before the law in that country and thrive together. But the Israelis don't want that. They want to keep this Jewish state that they believe God somehow promised to them in the Old Testament in perpetuity. But as far as my perspective is concerned, the religion of Judaism is an abrogated religion 3-4 times over already. So they don't have it, and they don't have a legitimate deed to that land anymore. And they should also go back to their Bible and Old Testament, that whenever they have sown the kind of inequity in the land that they are doing now, God has stepped in and kicked their ass out of there and scattered them to the four winds. Whether it did it at the hands of the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and then eventually by the hands of the Romans. They are actually creating a situation for something like this to happen again. And this is the thing. It is in the best interest of Jews themselves in Israel to dismantle the Jewish state, including those right-wing fascist settlers. Because if they keep on this road, they're going to lose that land permanently, right? And they're going to bring about their worst nightmare. So let us stop your worst nightmare from coming about. Stop what you're doing, think about you're doing, and let the people of that land live together in harmony as equal citizens. Because until you do that, this is the result you're going to get. You're going to continue to radicalize the situation over and over again. You have created a population on both sides who suffer from perpetual PTSD. Everybody is this is hell. What holiness is in that land, where all of the inhabitants living there are paranoid perpetually against each other and want to kill each other? That's not the Holy Land. That is hell, right? You have the power to stop this. Stop this. Come back to yourself. stop this colonial settlerism. If there are outside forces and powers that are forcing you to act and be this way, push them out, namely the Americans and the military-industrial complex of the West. This is an industry that benefits from perpetual conflict, especially in Palestine. So push these people out of your lives, and find the final settlement between the Jews and Arabs to live on that land together as brothers, as the sons and daughters of Abraham, and of Isaac and Ishmael. This is the only solution to this problem. No states, two-state solution, one-state solution. A democratic, secular, multi-ethnic Palestine. This is the only solution to this issue, and nothing else. I end it.
That is true. That is true, Sheikh. Absolutely. And a lot of people say that God is not a real estate agent, and God has basically given that land to all human beings, and God's chosen people are actually supposed God's chosen people are now acting like God's chosen lunatics.
Yeah.
And all of this stuff, like this birthright Israel, those people are not even from there. They that's why when you look at the airport, they have somewhere to run to. They're all running away back to Europe, to America, wherever they came from. What about the Palestinians? They have nowhere to go. So these people, they get promised a free home, free this, free whatever, because of birthright Israel. And they come from Brooklyn or Poland or some other European countries. And they go into, let's say, the home of a Palestinian family that's been living there for a long time, and they just kick them right out.
Yeah.
Why? Because, God told me this is mine. There is no logic in that. That means the Native Americans could go to every white home in America and make the same claim that, this was ours originally. And the aspect of what these people are doing over there, such as at the Al-Aqsa Masjid, these Talmudic rabbis were going there and doing these Talmudic rituals. What response did you expect from the Muslims, where
Exactly.
a bully keeps attacking you? I mean, if you look at the news, if you've been following the Israeli-Palestinian news, for people that do that, every day you hear, a civilian killed here, somebody killed here, somebody killed here. It gets to a boiling point. You do not let them go to their holy sites, which is also against international law. So number one, you're bullying them. You're not letting them go to their holy site. You're desecrating their holy sites. And now you're committing a crime against humanity by turning their water and food and everything off. What response do you expect from somebody like that? And I believe the white Western world should be ashamed of themselves with their virtue signaling. With every year they tell us to feel bad for the Jews in the schools when they teach us about the Holocaust and all that stuff. But when a non-white victim comes, it's a present situation that's taking place. They're all silent, right? It's like even with my social media post, no, and with Sheikh Wahid Azal's post, there is no response from any of these people, and they will pay they will pay a price for that, for their because
Of course they are.
those people that are silent and they're not speaking up against injustice taking place, God will punish them more than the actual perpetrators, because they had the power to do something,
Exactly.
to help somebody or to change a specific situation.
Exactly.
So
Silence is complicity. Silence is in the crime. It's like if someone is getting mugged or raped in the middle of the street and people just walk by, you're complicit in it. You're complicit. It's as simple as that. You have a moral agency, and your moral agency, God-given moral agency, says that you have to intervene. If someone is in trouble, you have a God-given moral agency to intervene. Simple as that. If you don't and you walk away, you are complicit in the crime. And this goes for struggles such as the struggle in Palestine. Now, why do most people in the West remain silent or back the Israelis? For a very simple reason, is because in North America, in Australia, in these countries, white supremacy is the dominant ideology. And a narrative that contradicts that then shatters this myth of their supremacy. Even though white supremacy is not out, it's not spoken. Nobody is wearing a Nazi uniform walking down the street, or a white hood. But this is the dominant ideology of the West, is white supremacy. And something like this challenges the self-adulation of these white Anglo-Europeans about their supremacy. And so, whereas 70, 80 years ago, these very same white people were completely on board with the Nazi narrative about the Jews, where anti-Semitism was one of the most prevalent narratives in the white world, right? Today, since the inception of the State of Israel and the assimilation of Jews, Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Mizrahi, and otherwise, into the notion of whiteness, this is now changed. So in the mind of most white people in the West today, Jews are white. And because Jews are white, despite the fact that the Holocaust was perpetrated, despite the fact that, even in America, in Canada, in Europe, everywhere, anti-Semitism was the dominant narrative. And excuse me for using this word, the Jews were the niggers of the white world for the last 1,000 years, as simple as that. So since the end of the Second World War and the fact that there was a collective guilt, established, at least as far as the Germans are concerned, for perpetrating the Holocaust, from that moment forward, there was a shift, and such that the Jews, all segments of world Jewry from that point forward, were now deemed to be white, right? So all of these narratives went out the window, and the only people who continue to maintain that narrative of the non-whiteness of Jews are neo-Nazis, or the hardcore, far-right neo-Nazi groups. Those are the only people who continue to maintain that narrative. But the generality of the white world looks at Jews as white. So that is why you have the kind of reactions that you do, where no matter what happens to the Palestinian people, no matter how many Palestinian mothers lose their children, no matter how many Palestinians are maimed, or not just Palestinians, any other black and brown people in the world, you will not have the same level of empathy and sympathy for those people as you have for Israelis or Ukrainians. Now, this is a very unfortunate situation, because Ukrainians or people, white people who are being assaulted by an outside force are morally on the same plane as black and brown people. So the Ukrainians, average people on the ground, had nothing to do with the dirty politics between the governments of Ukraine and Russia and the various forces. These are people living their lives. So it is this is where I think even a lot of the people on the left who have, backed Putin in this war in Ukraine need to go back to the drawing board. We support people on the ground. To hell with Zelensky, to hell with the government of Ukraine, to hell with these various constellation of Ukrainian oligarchs. I stand with the people of Ukraine. I don't stand with the government of Ukraine. And the people of Ukraine have as much right to their peace of mind, safety, health, and security as any other people on this planet. But this also goes for the Palestinian people, who have been subjected to the most brutal occupation regime in the modern history of humanity since 1948. And this needs to stop one way or another. So, those people, especially a lot of my Iranian compatriots who beat their chests for the situation of the people of Iran, but then back Netanyahu and the Israelis, these people have no moral compass at all. Because the same thing that is happening to the people of Palestine is the same thing that is happening to the men and women of Iran by this theocratic regime, regardless of the fact that Ali Khamenei and the Islamic Republic of Iran, at least in word, claim to support the people of Palestine. I'm telling you that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict for a regime like the IRI is to its benefit. If this resolves, then the Islamic Republic of Iran will be no more. It will lose its raison d'etre. Nevertheless, the people of Palestine are in the same situation as the people of Iran. So if you support your own compatriots back in Iran, you have a moral duty, a moral God-given duty to support the people of Palestine that are subjected to the same thing. One in Iran by a theocratic fascist regime, the other one by a racist colonial settler regime practicing apartheid. It's as simple as that. There's no difference between these conflicts. But this is like I said, there's a silver lining in these events, is that the wheat and the chaff of the world are also being separated. So we are seeing who the righteous are and who the unrighteous are. Obviously, the normies that are, basically falling in line behind the mainstream narrative about what's happened. These people are just lost, in my opinion. We don't even deal with these people, whoever they are. But you're also seeing a lot of people wake up, and social media is proving this. So the deregulation of social media that a lot of us, even on the left, were decrying because of the fact that it was, you were finding a stampede of far rightists and Trumpers and etc. This has now become a double-edged sword for the very people who meant it to become that way, because it is now creating sympathy and a narrative that is showing the other side of the situation. And this dialectic, in my opinion, will resolve in the favor of the people of Palestine and the decolonization of that region eventually. sooner maybe than later.
Absolutely, Sheikh. And the recent story that I've been seeing in the Zionist control media, it's about Hamas beheading the babies, and it reminds me of when the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador testified, and she was crying about the babies who were pulled out of the incubators. So that kind of like had a similar pattern that I've noticed on that. And when I looked at all of the major news organizations in the Western world, whether it's the UK, the USA, Canada, or Australia, the white Western world in general, most of the heads of these news networks are Zionist Jews.
Yes.
And whether you look at Hollywood, the adult porn industry, the sports industry, anything, and you see all of these people coming out of the woodwork. Oh, pray for Israel, pray for Israel. And God forbid anybody says anything about Palestine.
But
Oh, the person's contract gets revoked.
look at the diction. Look at the division. Pray for Israel. Why pray for Israel? Why not say pray for people?
Exactly.
What is that? Why don't they say that? Why do they say pray for Israel? You know, I mean, they are deliberately being divisive. Rather than trying to unite, they're trying to divide. We're saying pray for the people, be they Jew or Muslim, be they Christian or Druze.
Yeah.
Pray for the people. Don't make a distinction saying is pray for Israel. Why? No, don't pray for Israel. This is a land that is a term of iniquity now. You know, the Lord of the universe itself recoils from that name. Yeah, I said it. You know, the fact is you have to pray for the people who are caught in the crossfire of this conflict, whoever they are, they have to be prayed for. They don't deserve this. But the fact of the matter is that this is a war of liberation now. It is. This is the Palestinian war of liberation. This is the whole. This is in reverse. How the Jews who gained control of this land officially as of 1948. This is now happening in reverse, but this time by the indigenous people of that land, and they can kill as many people as they want. Eventually, the people at the bottom will prevail. But that's where we have our work cut out for us. Because one thing that we want to prevent from ever happening again is to get the victim to become the perpetrator once they win the struggle. This is going to be the most important and most challenging thing that the next generation of you guys are going to have, is to prevent the same thing happening where you had the Jews come out of the Holocaust, establish their Zionist state in the Levant, and then become the very thing that had been persecuting them for the last 1,000 years, and especially in the 6 years of the Second World War. We want to prevent it. We want to prevent a generation of Palestinians to emerge to start persecuting Jews and perpetrating it up, because this cycle needs to be broken once and for all. That is going to be the challenge.
That's absolutely right, Sheikh, and I agree completely. And I have faith in my generation and the Generation Z and after them, because what I've seen on social media, like let's say maybe YouTube or TikTok or these other platforms that are there, that people are pushing back against the mainstream Zionist narrative. People are more spiritually in tune now, especially the young generation. They can see people suffering and humanity suffering, and people who are on the side of the truth, they know that that is correct. Whether it's if you look at the Holy Quran in Surah 2 verse 62, or the last two verses of Surah Baqarah, it tells you the concept of that the true people of God do not make any distinction. As long
Exactly.
as you're a believer and as long as you're a righteous individual, then you will be fine. And that is the concept that even in the Noor FSO that we carry, about you being a good and righteous and upright individual, fighting against injustice and standing up for the truth and doing the right thing with the time that God has given you. And that responsibility lies in the hands of the Palestinians, because
Yes.
eventually we all see this, that whether it takes another 5 years, 7 years, but by 2030, at the scale that this is going, the Palestinian people will have their freedom, and it will be their responsibility to not be like their oppressors and show the world the real Islam, about how we are taught to live in harmony with all people. And we're seeing that even that mutiny happening in the Israeli army, where
Yes.
people are abandoning their posts. They're saying they don't want to go to Gaza. They don't want to go to war, because a lot of these people, they're forced to serve in the military. They don't have any experience. So as soon as like an actual gunfight comes to their face, then they abandon their posts and they run
Look,
away.
Some of our best friends in Berlin, and especially this lesbian couple that came out for Nuri and I after Roya passed away, were former IDF soldiers that basically considered themselves, Israeli refugees in Berlin. And some of these people were the most critical of Zionism, Jews
Yeah.
themselves, right? Left-wing Jews living in Berlin. Some of them are dear friends of mine that I'm still in contact with. In fact, a lot of the information about what's happening on the Palestinian side is coming from them to me, because they're switched on to these various peace groups in Israel right now. And these people were critics, and we were all part of the BDS in Germany, which technically now is an illegal organization in Germany. And the German government was even coming after of these, Israeli expats, Jews living in Germany, for their participation in BDS. So, this is not about anti-Semitism, and the existence of these people proves that this whole spiel about anti-Zionism being anti-Semitism is a lot of baloney, because, all my close circle of friends were anti-Zionist Jews in Berlin. They had nothing but respect for my tradition. I had respect for their tradition. And, two of them came out for Nuri and I when Roya passed away. This is saying something, So this is not about anti-Semitism. I'm an anti-Semite. I despise Nazis, and my anti-fascist credentials are known worldwide. This is about justice. This is about a people not being instrumentalized by imperialism to subjugate another people. A people subjugated, a people who have been violated by one demon, then becoming demons themselves to violate another people, so that they become demons. You see what's going on here? This is a malevolent cycle that originates in the bowels of hell itself. This is satanic. The Jews for 1,000 plus years in Europe were subjected to the worst humiliations that you could imagine. They were ostracized. There were incessant pogroms against them. And then this all culminated in the Nazi Holocaust. Then they come back. They gain their nationhood, and they immediately become exactly the same thing that was persecuting them for the last 1,000 years. This cycle is satanic. This cycle needs to stop. And we also have to then ensure on the day that this colonial settler state ends, that our side doesn't become the same thing. Because this is the easiest trap for every liberated people to fall into. From one day being the oppressed to the next day being the oppressor. This is the challenge from here on out, to stop that process. Because that is hell. That is the shaitan right there.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Sheikh. And unfortunately, here in America, especially with the news network, they're creating that same fear of Muslims
Yes.
that it was in the post 9/11 world, and how that same Zionist media, like how they pushed in 2002, every day in the news, they pushed anthrax, 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 and
Yeah.
weapons of mass
Remember that?
destruction. And what happened? You had a million plus Iraqis, innocent people that died. So they're pushing that same fear, and basically these agents of chaos that are here causing that same divide within the people. So I believe it's, before it gets better, Sheikh, it's going to get worse, and we're going to see more chaos, especially if you look astrologically. If you look at the year 2024 in the Chinese zodiac sign, it's supposed to be the year of the dragon,
Yes.
and 2024 comes up to number 8. So
Yeah.
that also signifies completion with the U.S. elections taking place. So I believe like this fight is long from over. And
No.
Netanyahu, I've seen some even news reports from Israeli news sites as I was looking through the searches, how even the Israelis are saying that we need to get Netanyahu out of here, and how there were videos in the past him describing the same situation today, and him saying we would capitalize on this opportunity and
See?
have a reason to go and eliminate these people.
See? Yeah, exactly. That is why my recommendation to people who are watching this want an actual book to, as on a level of theory, to take seriously what I just said. A book I really recommend people study, and it's a very tiny book, is by the late Brazilian liberation theologian and critical theorist Paulo Freire. The book is called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. This little tiny book should be studied, because one of the themes of this book is that one of the tasks of the oppressed is not only to liberate themselves from oppression and the oppressor, but also to liberate the oppressor from his oppressor. So that means that the oppressed have to liberate on different sides. And that doesn't mean in the old Stalinist way where you basically then re-educate people in that Stalinist way. No, we have to novelize about how we do this, right? You have to teach freedom to people, including especially the oppressor. Even if he's using the language of freedom like the American system is and the American military is, these words have lost their meaning. When American politicians talk about freedom, it doesn't have any resonance anymore because they have taken the freedom of their own people and they have taken the freedom of the world in the process in various different ways. No, freedom has to be relearned, real freedom. And any liberation organization on the planet today, genuine liberation, has to be adept at these arguments, has to be adept. They have to practically be magicians and psychiatrists all at the same time to be able to not only liberate a people from oppression, but also mentally and spiritually have the way to liberate these hearts that have been infested with the darkness of the devil himself. That is a big job, but this is what is required for the next generation. And you guys have to really step up, really, teach, learn, think, and novelize on methods, to change this landscape. Because if you don't, and this condition continues, the human race will vanish from this earth. It's as simple as that. Because like I've always been saying as well, the number one issue that we are facing over the next 100 years is an environmental issue. And ways that we need to find to reverse this condition. Otherwise, the ecological devastation as a result of the Anthropocene, that is humanity's ability to destroy itself, will destroy itself. It really as straightforward as that.
I agree completely, Sheikh, and that's why one of the main highlights of the Noor FSO is the prohibition of the buying and selling of the elements, air, fire, water, and earth, because God has made us basically the caretakers of this planet. And it says that in the Quran and in other scriptures that this world has been given to us and we are responsible for how it is. So we must eliminate all of these hatreds and misconceptions and the destroying of the environment and nature and come together to build a healthier society for future generations. Now, these people, whether it's in the U.S. government, who are mostly all of them are dual citizens with Israel, calling for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, what we're seeing with all of the sports people and everyone just bowing down to the Zionist agenda. These people are not part of the solution. The part of the solution people are good people on all sides, humanity in general, like Sheikh Wahid Azal has taught us that we are for humanity. And the good Muslims, good Christians, good Jews, we all need to come together. And these small forces that have manipulated us and exploited us and hurted us for God knows how many generations and years, they need to be brought down. And people have to tell them that enough is enough. We're living in a society where people have barely enough money to survive with the inflation. So it's going to get to a point, even in America, there's social unrest, economic unrest. People are just going around looting stores and not caring about consequences. People mentally and spiritually are not in a good place.
No.
And this latest incident is not, basically, it's adding to the fire even more in terms of the emotions and the tension that's in the air.
You know why? You know why that is? Because the elites of this planet it's a very sick dynamic. They have figured out that unless you have a huge population in a constant state of anxiety, you cannot profit. So this is one of the underlying reasons why these events happen, to keep populations in a perpetual cycles of anxiety. You mess with people's mental health for as long as you possibly can to profit from it, because they're going to need things, or they're going to, they're going to commit crimes that then feeds the prison industrial complex, and on it goes. So this is a monster, a multi-headed monster that needs to be fed perpetually by the anxiety of human beings. Whereas peace, where people have peace of mind, is not profitable to these capitalists. And this is another reason why, the question of the dismantling of neoliberal capitalist order has to be taken on board for precisely that reason. Because as long as this system is in place, this is the result.
That's absolutely right. And these neoliberal capitals, these people are all part of the government. They're all part of Hollywood. They're all part of these different people pushing the agendas that they're pushing. And people here are even saying, the American people, okay, why is $5 billion of my taxpayer money going to the Zionist state of Israel every year? While people here, the homeless and the people, veterans and other people, don't have access to services. People are suffering in the current economy. So it's going to get to a point where it's going to be a global revolution. I'm seeing that in
Yes.
my home country of Pakistan. I'm seeing that in Iran. I'm seeing that here in the US. Even in the UK, people are out in the streets over the NHS, the economy. Everything is so expensive. So something's got to give, and they always use war as a distraction to
Yes.
have people forget about these issues. And I think the solutions that Sheikh Wahid Azal has pointed out, it is part of humanity's solution. And I implore anyone in the United States or Canada, if you're interested in the Noor FSO, we need good brothers and sisters who individually can contribute to this effort. Please reach out to me, and please reach out to the Sheikh. And Sheikh Wahid Azal, if there's anything that I failed to ask you about this Israeli-Palestinian conflict, please.
All I would say is that people need to be very skeptical and scrutinize every single narrative and wherever it comes from, right? Do follow your heart and intuition, because these are usually right when you look at something. Do not react, think, and then emote, right? Rather than emote and then think. This is what most people are doing. When you do that, then you will begin to see what's really going on. Broaden your horizons. That means even people on our side should read what the other side is saying, or consider it and then pick it apart if there are contradictions in it. Because this is the only way we get it to the truth. Become adept at using a dialectical framework of looking at the world, so that you look at both opposite sides in order to create the synthesis. Now, if you're a Marxist, a genuine Marxist, then this is what you should be doing anyway. But this is the method to do that, and do not buy into bandwagoning on any side at all, and look at
Yes.
the solution to the conflict.
That's absolutely right. And for my thoughts, I would conclude what the Sheikh has said as well, is that we must use our hearts and minds and use discernment when there's any agenda that's out there pushing one side against the other, because that's where the elites profit off of. So we must be able to see and look at everything from a factual point of view and see where the world is going. And in my opinion, by the time we reach 2030, if we do not turn this thing around in terms of war, natural disasters, and the things that we're seeing in the world happen today, humanity is going to face a 0 point event, and
Yes,
we have to get our acts together. We
big
have to
time.
become one human family, and we have to do the right thing. But unfortunately, as much as I try to keep faith with humanity day by day, what I see, it only hurts me. But
And
at the same time, I cannot lose faith and I cannot lose hope to see where the future might be taking all of us, for the sake of the Sheikh's children, others' children, and their future generations. If we do not leave a better world for them, then we God will hold us accountable for that.
100%. My advice is, you actually put your finger on something very important here. Um, People who lose faith in humanity, yes, if one puts one's faith in humanity, guaranteed one will lose that faith every time. Everybody. Never put your faith in humanity for its own sake. Put your faith in humanity for the sake of the spirit, not for its own sake. That's what, even all of these teachings say. Don't put your faith in others because of themselves. Put your faith in them because of the spirit or God. That is how this works, this dynamic. Because if you put your faith in others and project, they're going to disappoint you. And we just lost another brother this week, Dean O'Hare. I should mention that. That really, really broke my heart. Dean and I were good friends on Facebook. We had a couple of Skype conversations. We never met. He was living in New York. And he got very depressed on the eve of all of the stuff that was unfolding in the Middle East. And only this last week he passed away. Dean was a Sufi. He was an Alavi Bektashi Sufi, and was also an anti-racist skinhead. And him and I had a lot of interesting conversation over the last couple of years. And Dean had traveled, was very well traveled throughout the world. And he had a heart of pure gold, but the people around him were constantly disappointing him. And this was his incessant complaint, and he felt isolated. But he was living in a big city where people's akhlaq is usually not the best. I
Yes.
told him many times that maybe he should consider about moving into the countryside because he loved nature and animals, etc. So his memory is truly blessed, and we are all of us, his friends, were very devastated to hear about his passing. It was very sudden. He had heart failure, just out of the blue. His heart broke, basically. Many of us were worried that he might take his own life, but it appears that his heart finally gave out. Rather than him taking his own life, it's just his heart broke. And this is perfectly understandable. And I ask everybody who's watching this to say a little Fatiha for Dean, because he was a warrior. He's a fallen warrior of ours. And may his memory be blessed, and may God shed his light on him all the time. Amen.
Ameen. Ameen, Sheikh. I will recite Al Fatiha for our brother Dean. And it's unfortunate. I'm seeing a lot of heartbreak here. And myself, I've been experiencing a lot of that pain and heartbreak myself, because us as empathetic souls, we are very sensitive to these things, and we need to be in environment and areas where we can relate to the world and spirit and nature around us. And recently, I also lost a friend from my high school, a young man in his 30s, just like myself. Nothing wrong with him. And before he passed away, he told his mother to leave the material world, and he would tell his mother, "Come to God." He was a Sikh, so he would tell his mother, "Follow the Baba, go to the Gurdwara, do the good things, pass out food to the homeless." And the mother was surprised. Why is this kid telling me all of this stuff? and and he says, "My time is up, mom, go get me a glass of water." And then by the time she came, he was gone. So he was a spiritually in tune soul, and people are suffering from that heartbreak, like Dean did and my friend who passed away did. We are living in a strange time and challenging time, and I would say we're all walking each other home, and
Yeah.
we owe this love and light to one another. Let's love each other. Let's penetrate through these agendas like Sheikh Wahid Azal has educated us today, and stand up for humanity, not for any specific race or religion, but for humanity, for the sake of Allah. Like how people always tell each other, "I love you for the sake of Allah." Please come together for that same sake if we want to save this world in its current format.
Amen.
So,
Amen.
with that, I conclude part 21 with Sheikh Wahid Azal. And inshallah, we will do future episodes down the road, part 22 and beyond.